The 13-inch variant of the brand new M2 iPad Air is really quite mid. And when I say mid, I don't mean in a bad way, not for 1 second. Because if you're looking to upgrade from an older iPad Air or even an older base model iPad to a brand new iPad with more recent features and more importantly a much larger display, but you're not willing to shell out pro level money, especially this year with the iPad Pro 13-inch, which is the most expensive it's ever been, the 13-inch iPad Air is literally the perfect iPad for you. Starting at $800 US for the 13-inch variant of the M2 iPad Air, it comes with a base storage of 128 gigs as standard and ships with the M2 chip as well, which is more power than basically anyone will ever need. But the reason why I'm calling this 13-inch iPad Air mid is not because it's bad by any means, but because it slips right in the middle of Apple's existing iPad lineup. And this 13-inch iPad Air is perfectly placed in this new iPad lineup because it's not exorbitantly expensive, but it still gives you a massive screen size for anything you need to do on an iPad. Now, before I continue with the rest of the video, and even though I have a fully set up iPad Air right in front of me, I'm actually going to be doing an unboxing of the iPad Air again, but in a different color, because the unboxing experience is actually different based on the region you're in. Usually I would never do an unboxing like this in the middle of the video, but these are kind of extenuating circumstances. So of course on the top of the box we have the iPad Air itself, and if I set that aside for now, underneath we have the paperwork as well as the charging brick and the USB-C cable, which is braided, which is a really nice touch. So the first change in the unboxing experience is actually with the paperwork, because now you don't get Apple stickers included with your iPad box. And this is the case for any of the iPads that were just announced, including the M2 iPad Air as well as the M4 iPad Pro. But the second change to the unboxing experience is this power adapter, because if you're in the EU or the UK, you actually won't receive a power adapter with your iPad in the box. Now this might be due to new e-waste regulations in the region, but there's also might be a really convenient way for Apple to get revenge on the EU, but I guess we'll never know. But at least you get the braided USB-C charging cable in the box, so I guess not all hope is lost. At least for now. But as for the iPad itself, it's still here in all its glory, and the one I have here is the blue version, and the one I had set up earlier was the purple version. But if anything about these iPads is truly mid, it has to be the colors for this year, because they are very muted. The colors for the iPad Air lineup this year are just so uninspiring, because this blue and purple in some lighting conditions basically look identical. If you're wondering about the differences between this 13-inch iPad Air and the 11-inch iPad Air, there's three main ones. Firstly, there's the size of the display from 11 to 13 inches, which is a pretty big jump. Secondly, there's the screen brightness as well, because the 13-inch iPad Air actually goes to 600 nits of peak brightness as opposed to 500 on the 11-inch. And thirdly, the 13-inch iPad Air actually has better speakers because there's more room in the actual chassis of the iPad for sound to resonate through, which is a nice touch. But apart from those three changes, everything else of the 13-inch iPad Air is completely identical to the 11-inch iPad Air. From the M2 chip that's actually powering the whole show, to the landscape orientation cameras, which is new for the iPad Air this year, along with a single camera on the back, the fingerprint sensor is still in the power button, and of course the display is still 60Hz. Now here's my verdict about the 60Hz display on the iPad Air. If you're upgrading from a non-pro iPad that's never had a 120Hz display, and you're upgrading to this iPad, it's going to feel like a massive upgrade regardless of whether the screen is 60Hz or not, because everything from the chip to this form factor to basically all of the little features are going to be so much better compared to the iPad you're upgrading from. But if you're thinking of upgrading from an older iPad Pro that has a 120Hz display, getting the 60Hz on the iPad Air is going to feel like a downgrade because it's going to feel choppy by comparison. Now it goes without saying that the biggest pull for the 13-inch iPad Air is just the sheer size of the display. Especially if you like multitasking using features like Stage Manager, it is just a no-brainer to go for the large option because you have so much more space to work with. And it's not just productivity either, because if you're just into watching or reading content on your iPad, having a bigger screen is just better in basically every single way. But personally, I feel like students and educators will benefit most from the bigger size, because personally when I was in university, I'd have some reference material on one side and my notes on the other side, and having this setup is kind of like having two iPads open side by side. It's just so productive. And the fact that you can get all this power and all the screen real estate without paying pro money is I think one of the biggest pulls for this iPad, because like I said before, Apple's going to sell a whole bunch of these iPads just because of the size and the price alone. And not to mention, having a larger iPad is going to be so much more useful if you're thinking of using your iPad as a laptop alternative device with something like the Magic Keyboard accessory from Apple. Because when you pair the 13-inch iPad Air with the Magic Keyboard, you open up the possibility with how you can actually get work done with your iPad with its full-size keyboard as well as its trackpad on the bottom. But I think the absolutely best part about the iPadOS experience on this iPad Air 13-inch is that you're getting the exact same experience on this as you would on the much more expensive 13-inch iPad Pro, which I think is a bargain on this side of the spectrum, because the iPad Air can basically do everything the iPad Pro can do, but for much less money. But there is one major complaint I have with the Magic Keyboard on the 13-inch iPad Air, and that's the fact that you can't get the same Magic Keyboard as the M4 iPad Pro for the M2 iPad Air, because this new Magic Keyboard for the M4 iPad Pro is just so much better. And the crazy thing is, They're both the same price. However, there is a second point of contention with the accessories for the 13-inch iPad Air, and that's with the Apple Pencil, because with this iPad Air, you're forced to get either the Apple Pencil USB-C or this brand new Apple Pencil Pro. Now, it's not all bad news because the new Apple Pencil Pro is the exact same price as the second generation Apple Pencil, and it has so many more features, but the fact of the matter is, if you still have a second generation Apple Pencil you're using with an older iPad, you're gonna have to ditch that one and get this one instead, which is still more money you're gonna have to spend. I am by no means an artist or a digital illustrator, and I just have Procreate open here as a visual aid. What did I just do? But anyway, if you've been using an older iPad, like a base model or an iPad Air for digital art, and you're looking for an upgrade to the experience that's not just the size of the canvas, but also the quality of the stylus, getting this iPad Air along with this Apple Pencil Pro is probably one of the best upgrades you'll ever make. Now, before I end off the video, I do want to bring to your attention that the M2 iPad Pro, which was the previous generation iPad Pro, still exists, and it's actually in some ways better than the M2 iPad Air in the 13-inch size. The M2 iPad Pro has a superior rear-facing camera setup, which honestly I don't think is that important, but what is important is it actually has Face ID, which the M2 iPad Air doesn't have, and Face ID just works so much more seamlessly compared to Touch ID, at least in my opinion. But I think what's most important is that the M2 iPad Pro has a much brighter, much more fluid mini LED 120Hz display, which is completely lacking on the M2 iPad Air 13-inch. Some artists prefer the 120Hz display on the iPad Pro because it makes writing and drawing feel more natural, but at the same time, the iPad Air actually has the much superior Apple Pencil, so this is really a toss-up as to whether you like the high refresh rate as opposed to whether you appreciate the features of the brand new Apple Pencil Pro. You really need to go to one of your local stores and try out a 60Hz versus 120Hz display for yourself and see if one of the other is important to you in terms of the priorities between the pencil or the more fluid display on the iPad Pro. But overall, the 13-inch M2 iPad Air, it's a pretty easy recommendation.